It was just another quiet Thursday night, until I overheard a conversation that shattered my entire world. In that moment, I realized my wife wasn't the woman I thought she was, and my own daughter was helping her hide it. Hey everyone, I just need to get this off my chest. It was a regular Thursday night, not a holiday, not a birthday, just one of those quiet evenings where everything felt like it was in its place. I'd wrapped up a long, draining day at work and was honestly just looking forward to unwinding in the comfort of my home. My wife, Amanda, was downstairs curled up on the couch, lost in one of her usual crime dramas. Meanwhile, our 16-year-old daughter, Lily, was tucked away in her room, probably chatting with one of her friends the way teenagers always seem to do, phone glued to their ear, giggling and speaking in code only they seem to understand. I wasn't trying to snoop or anything. I had just walked past Lily's room to wish her a quick good night, maybe ruffle her hair, the usual dad stuff. But as I was passing her slightly open door, a few words drifted out that made me freeze on the spot. "Yeah, Mom was with him again last weekend," Lily said, her voice so nonchalant, so casual, like she was talking about what movie they watched, not something that would gut me. I stopped mid-step just outside her doorway. I wasn't intentionally eavesdropping, but I couldn't move. My ears were ringing, heart thudding in my chest as my mind tried to make sense of what I was hearing. Who was him? Why did it sound like this wasn't the first time? Then came the rest of it. She's been seeing him for a while now. I know, right? She doesn't even bother to be sneaky anymore, Lily continued, her voice light with disbelief, maybe even amusement. I felt my insides twist. There was no denying what I was hearing. Amanda, my wife of nearly 2 decades, the woman I thought I knew inside and out, was involved with someone else. And the worst part? Our daughter knew. Lily had known for some time. A wave of sickness rolled over me, the kind that makes your skin go clammy and your legs feel weak. My brain was scrambling, searching for some other explanation. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe this was about a friend's mom, or it was some weird inside joke I wasn't in on. Anything but what it sounded like. But the universe wasn't going to give me that out. Instead, I heard more details that made my heart sink even deeper. "She asks me to cover for her sometimes, like if you know who calls," Lily said, her voice lowering into a conspiratorial whisper. "Dad would never believe it. He's completely clueless. She's actually gotten really good at sneaking around." Without thinking, a bitter laugh slipped out of me, sharp and involuntary. I slapped a hand over my mouth, immediately horrified that Lily might hear me standing there, that she'd know I had just stumbled upon a truth I wasn't supposed to find. I just stood there for a moment, frozen in place, then took a slow step back like the floor beneath me might give way. My thoughts were spinning out of control. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Lily knew. My own daughter had known all along about Amanda's affair, and instead of telling me, she'd been helping her keep it hidden. That realization hit me harder than anything else. It wasn't just Amanda who had deceived me, Lily had been part of it too. The betrayal cut so deep, it felt like something inside me had cracked wide open. I made my way downstairs, every movement stiff and mechanical like I was just going through the motions. My mind was a storm of disbelief and questions I couldn't answer. I sank onto the couch, barely aware of my own body, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart from the outside. I looked over at Amanda. She was sitting just a few feet away from me, completely engrossed in whatever show was playing on the TV. The light from the screen flickered softly across her face. She looked peaceful. Normal. Not a trace of guilt or tension. That calm expression on her face made me feel sick. How long had this been going on? How many nights had she walked out the door with a smile, telling me she was going to see a friend or run errands, only to end up in someone else's arms? And what about Lily? How many lies had she told on her mother's behalf? How many times had she looked me in the eye and pretended everything was fine? I wanted to confront Amanda right then and there, just yell, cry, demand answers. But I stopped myself. Blowing up in that moment, without any real proof besides what I'd overheard, would only make it easier for her to deny everything. She'd twist it around, accuse me of being paranoid, maybe even get Lily to back her up. And then I'd be the one made to feel crazy. No, I needed to be smart. I needed time to think, to gather myself, to figure out exactly how I was going to handle this. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I went through the motions, sitting, nodding, pretending, but I could barely form a sentence. Amanda didn't seem to notice anything was wrong. She laughed at her show, relaxed, totally unaware that the man sitting beside her was unraveling inside. That night, I lay in bed next to her, staring up at the ceiling in the dark while she slept soundly just inches away. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to Lily's voice on that phone call, the things she'd said, the ease with which she spoke about the whole thing, as if it was just a normal part of life. Memories started flooding in. Our wedding day. The early years when we were building our home, raising Lily, making plans for the future. I'd held those memories close, trusted in the life we were creating together. But now it all felt poisoned. Tainted. Amanda hadn't just betrayed me, she'd roped our daughter into the lie too. Lily, the little girl I'd carried on my shoulders, taught to ride a bike, stayed up late helping with science projects. She had picked her mother's side. Not just quietly either, she had played an active role in keeping me in the dark. The pain burned, but I held it in. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't shake her awake demanding the truth. Not yet. I knew that once I opened that door, there would be no going back. I knew I couldn't rush into anything. If I wanted to understand the full scope of what Amanda and Lily had been hiding from me, I'd need to move carefully, methodically. So I stayed there in bed, staring into the darkness, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of Amanda's breathing beside me. In that silence, I felt like a ghost in my own life, disconnected, watching everything I thought I knew crumble away piece by piece. The next morning, I forced myself out of bed and tried to go about my usual routine. Shower. Coffee. Keys. Outwardly, I tried to appear like nothing was wrong. I smiled when I needed to. Made small talk. I even kissed Amanda goodbye just like always. But inside, I was barely holding it together. Every glance I threw in Amanda's direction made my chest tighten. And every time I saw Lily, every time she smiled at me like nothing had happened, a bitter weight settled deeper in my gut. It wasn't just anger, it was betrayal soaked in heartbreak. The people I loved most had been weaving lies right under my nose, and now that I knew, I couldn't unsee it. But I wasn't going to react on emotion. No, I needed clarity. I needed the facts. I had to know the whole truth, how long it had been going on, how serious it was, and who the other man was. Amanda probably thought she had it all under control. That I was too naive, too trusting to ever catch on. But she was wrong. I wasn't going to confront her just yet. Not until I had everything I needed. So that morning, as I stepped out the front door and into the crisp morning air on my way to work, something shifted inside me. A cold, quiet resolve took hold. Amanda and Lily had made their choices. They'd chosen deception. And now, it was my turn to choose how I'd respond. Whatever lay ahead, I wasn't going to let them off easy. They would feel the weight of what they'd done. They would understand exactly how deeply they'd cut me. The days that followed were a fog, emotionally chaotic and mentally draining. My thoughts were in a constant state of overdrive, running through years of memories, reanalyzing every conversation, every hug, every lingering glance. I remembered the times Amanda would head out for her so-called girls' nights, saying she needed some space, a breather from the daily grind. And I never questioned her. I trusted her with my whole heart. That blind faith now felt like the biggest betrayal of all. But despite the overwhelming pain, I kept myself from exploding. I had to hold it in. If I confronted her now without anything solid, all I'd be doing was giving her a chance to cover her tracks. She'd tell me it was all in my head, twist the story until I was the one feeling guilty. I couldn't let that happen. I had to be smarter than that. This wasn't about vengeance, it was about truth. And I was determined to find it. I knew I couldn't make any decisions until I had undeniable proof. I needed more than just a gut feeling. I had to confirm every suspicion before I allowed myself to think about what came next. That night, I waited patiently until Amanda had drifted off to sleep. Her breathing had settled into a slow, rhythmic pattern, and I could tell she was deep into slumber. Quietly, I slipped out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest as I crept toward her office. I knew it wasn't right to invade her space like that, but something stronger than guilt pulled me forward. Something rooted in a desperate need for the truth. I opened drawers, thumbed through folders, checked the nooks where she sometimes tucked receipts and little notes. It felt surreal, like I was playing detective in my own home. In the bottom of her bag, folded carelessly among some old receipts, I found one that caught my eye. It was from a high-end restaurant across town, a place we usually reserved for anniversaries or birthdays. The date jumped out at me, a night she told me she was catching up with a friend. I remembered her even saying not to wait up. At the time, I hadn't questioned it. Now it felt like a red flag waving violently in front of my face. The receipt alone wasn't a smoking gun, but it chipped away at the doubt. I wasn't imagining this. Something was off. Back in the bedroom, I stared at Amanda's sleeping form for a long moment. Then, almost without thinking, I picked up her phone. I knew the passcode. It was the same one she used for just about everything, and I'd seen her enter it 100 times. I hesitated for a moment, a flicker of guilt creeping in, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about being nosy. It was about protecting myself from a truth that had already begun to unravel on its own. Once inside, I opened her messages. My heart sank. There, plain as day, were texts from someone saved as D. They weren't frequent, maybe because she was trying to be careful. But what was there was enough to tear the air from my lungs. Last night was amazing. Miss you already? When can we meet again? Each message felt like a slap, each word a cut deeper than the last. The tone, the familiarity, they weren't casual or platonic. They were intimate, full of warmth and longing that should have been reserved for me. In those messages, I saw a version of Amanda I didn't recognize, one who had built a second life, one where I didn't exist. And Lily, she'd known. She'd helped her mother keep this world intact. That realization hit me again, heavier than before. The rage came like a wave. I wanted to wake Amanda up, throw the phone at her, demand she explain every word. But I didn't. I clenched my jaw, let the anger burn quietly beneath the surface, and placed the phone back exactly where I found it. If I lost control now, I'd lose any chance of gathering more answers. She thought she was safe, that her secret life was neatly hidden away. But it wasn't. The truth had slipped out in careless moments, and now I had the pieces. The next morning, I sat at the breakfast table, hands wrapped around a mug I couldn't bring myself to drink from. Amanda moved around the kitchen like it was any other day, smiling, humming, totally unaware of the storm that had taken root inside me. I watched her closely, like someone seeing a person for the first time, realizing they were a stranger all along. She laughed, lightly, casually, at something Lily had just said. For a split second, it almost felt like any other morning. Like things were normal. But they weren't. Not anymore. I saw it all differently now. That smile on Amanda's face? It didn't feel genuine anymore. It looked rehearsed. Like something she'd perfected over time. Every word that came out of her mouth, every easy chuckle and warm glance, it all felt like part of a performance. A mask she wore to keep up appearances while hiding the betrayal underneath. Then I caught Lily's eyes across the table. Her face was calm, unreadable, maybe a little withdrawn. But I couldn't look at her the same way, not after what I knew. Not after realizing she'd been part of it. She hadn't just known about her mother's affair, she'd chosen to protect it. To protect Amanda. To protect the lie. And in doing so, she turned her back on me. That stung in a way I wasn't ready for. It wasn't just my wife I was losing. It felt like my daughter had slipped through my fingers too. Lily, who I'd raised with every ounce of love and patience I had made a choice, and it hadn't been me. That day at work, I couldn't concentrate. I sat at my desk staring blankly at my screen, the buzz of the office around me just a distant hum. My thoughts were consumed with everything I'd discovered, looping over and over like a record stuck in a groove. Anger simmered just below the surface, hot and steady, threatening to erupt at any moment. I wanted to tell someone. To call a friend, sit down with someone who could help carry the weight of it. But I didn't. I couldn't. This felt too personal, too raw. This was a wound I had to deal with on my own. No one else could make sense of it for me. So instead, I turned my energy toward the only thing I could control, finding out everything. Over the next several days, I became deliberate, almost clinical in my approach. I dug deeper, organizing every piece of evidence I came across. I kept a private folder on my own device, gathering screenshots of Amanda's texts, printing out receipts, taking notes on every small inconsistency I could spot. Her spending alone painted a picture I hadn't wanted to see. Meals, hotel bookings, charges that didn't match the stories she'd told me. Then, in the back of her office drawer, beneath a stack of old documents, I found it, an unused burner phone. It still had power. The curiosity burned through me and I turned it on, not sure what I'd find. But part of me already knew. The messages were all still there. Dozens of them, all from D. The tone was unmistakable, sweet nicknames, weekend plans, little fantasies about trips they wanted to take. They talked about moments they'd stolen together, sneaking around while I was none the wiser. Every message felt like a slap, like another confirmation that my marriage wasn't just broken. It had been rotting for a long time. That phone told me everything I needed to know. There was no more room for doubt. No more wondering if I'd misunderstood. Amanda had made her choice. And now I had to make mine. Confronting her? That would just lead to more of the same. More lies. More carefully crafted apologies with no real remorse behind them. I didn't want to hear any of it. I had seen enough. And the clarity of that truth was the only thing that kept me steady. I didn't want revenge in the usual sense. I wasn't looking to argue, to scream, or to beg her for anything, not even an explanation. What I wanted was something deeper. Something quieter but far more cutting. I wanted Amanda to feel the same kind of emptiness she had carved into my life. The silence, the void, the sense of being completely abandoned by the person you trusted most. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, casting a dull orange glow across the walls of our home, I made up my mind. I would disappear. No confrontation. No grand exit. Just silence. Just absence. The same kind she'd left in our marriage long ago without ever saying a word. Let her wake up one morning and reach for me in bed only to find the space beside her cold and empty. Let her wander through the house we built together, wondering where it all went wrong, realizing that the life she took for granted had simply slipped away. My disappearance would speak louder than anything I could ever say. That night I began the process quietly. Methodically. I started transferring money into a private account I'd set up in my name only. I began closing our joint accounts one by one, making sure it would take time for her to even realize what had happened. I moved slowly, carefully, never leaving a trace, never raising suspicion. She had spent so long thinking she was one step ahead, thinking I would never notice what she was hiding. But now I was the one in control. And soon she would feel the weight of what betrayal truly costs. The days that followed were some of the hardest I've ever lived through. Every morning I smiled like nothing was wrong. I kissed Amanda on the cheek. I made small talk with Lily. I played the part of the doting husband and loving father, even though inside I felt like I was living among strangers. The pain was sharp, constant, like a quiet roar beneath the surface. But I didn't let it show. I stayed patient. Calm. Steady. Every night after they went to bed I continued preparing. I researched small towns, places far from here, places where no one would know my name, where I could start over without the ghost of this betrayal following me around every corner. Eventually I settled on one. A quiet town tucked away in a part of the country Amanda had never even mentioned visiting. It felt right. Peaceful. Anonymous. I arranged a rental and wired just enough money to cover a few years of expenses. I wasn't planning a vacation. I was building an escape route. And then came the hardest part, deciding what to leave behind. I didn't take much, just a few belongings that truly meant something to me. A handful of old photographs, keepsakes from my childhood, and a couple of sentimental items passed down through my family. Things Amanda would never notice missing. Things that were mine, untouched by her lies. I didn't want to hurt her by taking valuables. That wasn't the point. What I wanted was for her to wake up and feel the void I left behind. To understand, in that raw, unmistakable way, what it felt like to lose something you thought would always be there. My absence was meant to be a message, silent but sharp. A symbol of the love, the loyalty, the life she had thrown away without a second thought. As I checked off the final steps of my plan, an unexpected calm washed over me. I wasn't running away. I wasn't being weak. This wasn't about defeat. It was about reclaiming something that had been taken from me, my dignity, my peace, my sense of self. For so long I'd been the one left in the dark. But now I was the one writing the ending. I had taken control. On that final night, I moved through the house slowly, letting my eyes settle on every familiar detail. Each room carried memories, good ones, bad ones, everything in between. I could almost hear Amanda's laugh echoing from the kitchen. I stopped in the hallway where Lily's old drawings still hung on the wall, faded but intact. Stick figures. Birthday cards. Love notes scrawled in crayon. My heart ached, but I didn't look away. I wanted to feel it all one last time. I had loved them both so deeply. Given everything. And now, standing there in that quiet house, I realized how far gone that love was. What remained wasn't anger anymore, it was emptiness. A hollow space where something precious had once lived. As dawn crept over the horizon, I grabbed my bag and stepped out into the cool morning air. The world was still asleep, and everything was wrapped in that soft, eerie quiet that comes just before the sun breaks through. I stood at the end of the driveway, took one last look at the place that had been my home, and let out a breath I hadn't even realized I was holding. That part of my life, the part where I was a husband, a father in a house full of secrets, was over. I wasn't just leaving a house. I was leaving behind the betrayal, the deception, and the man I used to be. I didn't know exactly what was waiting for me on the other side. But as I turned the key in the ignition and pulled away, a strange sense of something unfamiliar crept in, freedom. Not the kind you chase but the kind you earn. And for the first time in a long time I felt light. The first few days in my new town felt like a dream. I had chosen a small, peaceful coastal town where the sea met the sky in endless shades of blue. It was far enough from everything that I knew Amanda and Lily would never track me down, not unless I wanted them to. I found a modest apartment with a little balcony that looked out over the ocean. It wasn't luxurious, but it was enough. More than enough. Life on my own was quiet, unfamiliar sure, but not unpleasant. The silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt clean. Honest. I spent my days walking through town, learning its rhythm, discovering its hidden corners. I chatted with locals, nodded to shop owners, slowly letting myself become a part of something new. No one here knew what I'd been through. No one asked questions. And that was exactly what I needed. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't defined by someone else's lies. I wasn't a broken husband or a betrayed father. I was just me. And in that stillness I began to heal. I wasn't anyone's husband anymore. I wasn't a father, not in any real sense. I was just a man, untethered, rebuilding from the ground up. For the first time in years I felt like I could breathe. But that didn't mean the past never came knocking. Every now and then, without warning, my thoughts would drift back to Amanda and Lily. I'd imagine them waking up that first morning to an empty bed, the silence in the house hitting just a little too hard. I pictured Amanda searching the rooms in confusion, piecing it together bit by bit. I wondered what Lily felt, if she finally understood the cost of keeping quiet, of choosing to protect the lie instead of facing the truth. There was a kind of grim satisfaction in knowing they were left with the consequences of their choices. Not out of cruelty, but because for once they couldn't rewrite the story or explain it away. They had lost something they thought would always be there. I kept my phone off from the moment I left. No texts. No calls. No trace. I cut every thread that connected me to the life I had once known. It wasn't just about disappearing, it was about starting over with a clean slate. And slowly the memories of that old life began to fade. What once consumed me now felt distant, like a dream I couldn't quite remember clearly. 3 years slipped by. And in that time I built something new. Something that felt honest. My days were quiet but full. I knew every corner of the little coastal town now, the cobblestone streets, the bakery with the best coffee, the cliffside path that gave me peace like nothing else ever had. I made friends, the kind who didn't know a thing about Amanda or Lily or the man I used to be. And that anonymity was a gift. The scars were still there, sure. But they didn't define me anymore. With time they'd softened, faded. And somewhere along the way I'd begun to truly heal. Then one crisp fall afternoon, as I sat in a cozy cafe tucked between two old bookshops, something happened that I never saw coming. I was nursing a warm mug of tea, letting the sound of the waves just beyond the windows lull me into thought, when a voice, familiar and out of place, broke through the moment. Brian. I looked up and there he was, Dan. An old friend from the life I'd left behind. He stood there frozen, his eyes wide, his face pale with disbelief. Dan, I said quietly, stunned. Yeah, it's really me. He pulled up a chair and sat down across from me, still staring like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. You just disappeared, he said, voice low. No one had any idea where you went. We thought, well, we didn't know what to think. I needed a clean break, I replied cautiously. A chance to start over. I wasn't sure how much I wanted to say or even how much he already knew. Dan leaned forward, his expression shifting into something heavier. You missed a lot, he said, voice barely above a whisper now. After you left, things got rough. For Amanda and Lily. Really rough. My heart thudded in my chest. I hadn't expected this. The emotions I'd buried so deep began to stir, rising up like ghosts I thought I'd left behind. I gave Dan a slight nod, trying to keep my face composed, even though my heart was pounding. I could feel a storm brewing just beneath the surface, but I didn't let it show. He leaned in a little, lowering his voice. Right after you left, people were stunned. Nobody could figure out what happened. At first, everyone felt sorry for Amanda. She played the part well, heartbroken wife abandoned without warning. People thought you'd had some kind of crisis or breakdown. I raised an eyebrow, my curiosity sharpening. So what changed? I asked, doing my best to sound casual. Dan glanced around the cafe as if making sure no one was listening. Well, he said, his tone shifting, turns out Amanda wasn't nearly as careful as she thought she was. People started noticing things, how often she went out, the expensive dinners, the way she never really seemed upset about you being gone. Then the whispers started. And after a while, those whispers turned into full-on rumors. He paused, watching my reaction. I stayed quiet, letting him continue. It came out that she'd been having an affair. Not just once or twice, regularly. For a while. Folks started putting the pieces together, and when the truth finally surfaced, everything flipped. Sympathy turned into disgust. There was a tightness in my chest, but it wasn't pain, It was something closer to vindication. I already knew the truth. I had lived with it. But knowing others knew too? That she could no longer hide behind her lies? That hit differently. Dan's voice grew heavier. People turned on her, man. Friends she'd known for years stopped answering her calls. She was pushed out of social circles. Birthday parties, book clubs, you name it. Even her own family was ashamed. Her parents? I heard they were devastated. Embarrassed. I stared at the table for a moment, then looked back up. What about Lily? I asked, though I already felt the weight of the answer coming. Dan shook his head slowly. That's where it really fell apart. Lily found out the full story not long after you left. They had a huge fight. Screaming match. She blamed Amanda for everything. The cheating, the broken home, your disappearance. She carried a lot of guilt too from what I heard. For covering it up. For not telling you. He exhaled sharply, his expression reflecting a mix of sadness and disbelief. After graduation, Lily packed up and left town. Cut all contact. She and Amanda haven't spoken since. I leaned back in my chair, letting that sink in. Amanda had lost everything, her friends, her reputation, her family, even her own daughter. All the things she thought would always be there, all the people she took for granted were gone. My absence had forced her to face a reality she had spent years avoiding. I didn't expect it to go like this, I said quietly, almost to myself. There was no triumph in my voice. No sympathy either. Just a hollow reflection on how far things had fallen. Dan gave a small nod, as if he understood the weight of what I wasn't saying. And I realized, sitting there in that little cafe, that I didn't feel broken anymore. The pain had passed. The anger had burned away. What remained was clarity, and something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt it then, a deep, undeniable sense of closure. Like a door had finally shut with a quiet but resolute thud. Not just closure though. Justice. The kind that doesn't come from confrontation, but from truth revealing itself in time. Dan studied me, his expression thoughtful, a mix of curiosity and empathy. Honestly, he said, sounds like you did the right thing. Some situations, walking away really is the strongest move you can make. We sat in silence for a few moments, the air between us filled with everything unspoken. The past hung there, suspended, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt finished. I thanked him, not just for telling me but for giving me something I didn't realize I still needed. That last missing piece. The knowledge that the truth had come out, that Amanda's carefully constructed world had unraveled. It gave me peace in a way nothing else ever could. When we said our goodbyes and went our separate ways, I felt lighter. Not just emotionally, I mean physically lighter. Like I'd been carrying a weight I had grown used to, and now it was finally gone. The truth had surfaced, and with it, the justice I had quietly hoped for all along. Not revenge. Just the balance that comes when people are finally held accountable, by life, by time, by themselves. That evening, I took my usual walk along the shoreline. The sky was streaked with purples and soft oranges, and the waves rolled in steady, like they always did. As I walked barefoot through the cool sand, letting the wind touch my face, I realized something important. The life I once had, the one I had walked away from, was finally behind me. Amanda and Lily had made their choices. I had made mine. And standing there with the ocean at my feet, I felt truly free, for the first time. With that revelation, a new chapter began to unfold. It was a strange sensation, knowing that the people who once held my heart were now just distant memories. Their hold on me had vanished. The anger had loosened its grip. The betrayal no longer screamed inside me. Even the heartache had begun to dissolve. What replaced it was something I hadn't expected to feel again: liberation. In the days and weeks that followed, I leaned into the life I had spent the last few years quietly building. Until then, I'd kept to myself, cautious and reserved, afraid to let the world back in. But now, with the final remnants of that old pain behind me, I felt ready. Open. I began reconnecting with parts of myself I had long buried. I picked up my old camera again, rediscovering my love for photography. I hiked the winding trails along the cliffs, capturing the colors of the landscape, the way the light danced through the trees. I joined a small community group, not for distraction but for connection. I even started volunteering a few hours a week, helping out where I could. The people I met didn't know about my past. They didn't see a man who had been betrayed, they just saw me. And in that simplicity I found healing. Each day I felt a little more like myself. Not the man I used to be, but someone new, someone whole. The people around me saw the man I had become, not the burden I carried or the pain that had once shaped me. And that, in itself, was healing. I had reached a point where I no longer wore my past like a scar across my chest. It didn't define me anymore. One evening I was sitting in the corner booth at the local diner, surrounded by a small group of new friends. We were swapping stories over coffee, laughing about small-town oddities, and I caught myself smiling, genuinely smiling. It struck me then in that quiet moment just how far I had come. I was no longer tethered to the betrayal that once threatened to destroy me. I had built something better, stronger. What? There was one person in particular, Claire, who had become a steady presence in my life. She wasn't someone I had been looking for. She came along naturally without pressure or expectation. She had a gentleness about her, the kind of kindness that doesn't need words to be understood. One evening, as the sun set beyond the windows and the golden light filled the room, I opened up to her. Slowly, carefully, I shared fragments of my past. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the night I left, and everything that followed. I expected shock, maybe even discomfort. But Claire simply sat there, listening, her expression calm and grounded. When I finally stopped speaking, she reached across the table and placed her hand gently over mine. No grand response. No empty words. Just presence. And in that moment it was more than enough. With Claire, I found something I hadn't thought possible: companionship without wounds. A bond not built on saving or fixing, but on mutual respect and quiet understanding. There was no rush, no need to explain every piece of who I was. Just the freedom to be, fully and honestly. Amanda and Lily had become distant shadows in my life, figures from a painful chapter in a book I had finally closed. Their choices had once broken me, but they no longer had power over the man I had become. The life I lived now was mine. Free from lies. Free from bitterness. It was simple, peaceful, and most of all, real. As I stood by the shore one evening watching the waves roll in, endless, steady like time itself, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Deep, genuine peace. I had survived betrayal, rebuilt from the ashes, and come out stronger. Not because I had forgotten, but because I had grown. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was truly happy.